Roaring Twenties, a time of economic prosperity, jazz music, female independence, cinema, dancing, discrimination of immigrants, illegal alcohol consumption, and complete economic collapse. American culture changed drastically during the 1920s. The young flappers were feeling rebellious and everyone was earning more money. How does this point in Western history compare to our society today? On the 18th of August 1920, an amendment was made to the US Constitution allowing women to vote in elections. This newfound freedom and power women experienced led them, in part, to become flappers. Young women bobbed their hair and began wearing short, knee-high skirts. The flappers were intent on having fun and turning away from behaviours that were conventional. These women smoked in public, loved jazz music, wore large amounts of makeup, and treated sexual encounters and subjects very casually. Before the 1920s, it wasn't culturally acceptable for a woman to ask a man on a date or to initiate relationships. Flappers changed these stereotypes, and it soon wasn't uncommon for a woman to be leading a relationship. The progressive flappers of the 20s are very similar to the young women in our current time. There are many movies and television shows in which a strong woman decides to go for the kiss or has her own independent life with no need for a man. There are some very strong similarities in the opinions of flappers and the young women in our time. Older women talk about how inappropriate or unnatural it is for a girl to wear comparably more sexual clothing than the norm in the 1920s and right now. In the majority of films based around high school and college students, the cool and popular pupils are the ones who use drugs and alcohol. This is very similar to the flappers of the 20s. The economy of America during the 1920s was constantly growing as people bought more and more with their money. 3 Republican presidents were elected in a row during this period, which led to the government's laissez-faire approach to the economy. This leave it alone and it will handle itself belief did allow business to boom, at least in the short term. Larger businesses would employ more people that then spent their income on American products and services, further growing the economy. Americans weren't worried at all about future times when they started going into debt with their credit card spending. Doing so was normal at the time. Soon enough, most people owned possessions such as cars, washing machines, and toasters, making their lives much more pleasurable. The stock market became very popular during the 20s, and everyone was buying on a margin, wherein they would loan money from banks to invest with and make a profit as share prices rose. Everyone seemed to believe this situation would last forever based on how they spent their money. If the economy were to falter, which it did, the consequences would be utterly devastating. Comparing the economy of that decade to today, it is clear that the government has a much tighter control on its economy and business is a lot more regulated in order to prevent debt and overspending from becoming a problem again. The collective thoughts in Western culture to buy the newest thing is still prevalent in the 21st century. America's economy now is much better as the chance of an economic crisis is much lower.
What a marvelous age we live in.
The Jazz Age. The 1920s jazz music was very popular in Western culture. The jazz genre gained its large following because after World War I, everyone was in a celebratory mood and jazz music allowed people to express their chirpy and positive emotions. As families began purchasing radios for their homes, it allowed the spread of jazz music and fondness for it to spread across America and the Western world. By the time the 20s were over, there were radios in over 12 million American households. Jazz music was most popular within the younger population, and it gave rise to many iconic dance moves such as the Charleston, the Toddle, and the Shimmy. Jazz bands were often playing in the illegal speakeasies and groups would dance to the music as they drank. The birth of jazz music was caused by African Americans as they added their own cultural rhythms and melodies to European music. The spread and popularity of the music was due to both black and white Americans. Music nowadays is very corporate controlled compared to the jazz age. It is very rare for a drum beat in a song to come from a real drum and not a computer program. The singer's vocals in modern music is real, but any note slightly off pitch can be corrected easily using modern technology. The types of songs that are in our top 50 do not form much of a story about us or our current situation of our society. They only show how we are in an age where companies have learned the formula to generate the most money out of their music. In conclusion, the 1920s had a lot more in common with our current time than it might originally seem. Women were becoming empowered and independent in the 20s, and they still are today, just at a higher level. There are also differences between the two times. The economy of the 1920s was on a fast upward trend, but it was very unstable. Our current economy is under a much closer watch by governments, and it is much less likely to collapse like it did in the 20s. Popular music in Western culture nowadays is influenced much more by companies and organisations to generate profit, instead of creating a story about the time like the Jazz Age had.